Welcome back to Law Hacks. This is attorney Louise Fiore, and today we have a great guest, investigator Alexander Caceres. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Very well. Okay, so in today's video, we're going to be discussing ICE stay of removals. First, let's talk about what is an ICE stay of removal and what is ICE looking for when you apply for a stay of removal. So an ICE stay of removal is typically used for clients or immigrants who have exhausted the immigration legal system. In other words, you've gone through and seen an immigration judge, you've gone through all of your hearings in immigration court, and unfortunately, you lost your case and have received an order of removal. You've then gone through your appellate process of attempting to appeal the immigration judge's entry of your order of removal, and unfortunately, you have lost that as well. So now you have what is called a final order of removal. And in a final order of removal, that's where ICE steps in. ICE is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So by its own name, they are enforcing that final order of removal and deporting you from the United States into your country of origin, whether it be Colombia, Brazil, China, wherever. And essentially what you're doing with this ICE stay of removal is you're saying, hey, ICE, I get that you got to enforce this order. I get that that's your job. But I have special reasons. I have specific hardships that if I'm removed to my country, myself and or my family members that reside with me in the United States will suffer some sort of harm or some sort of hardship when being removed and following me back to my country, okay? So those are the criterias. That's what you're looking for. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Alex, and I kind of want to discuss with you from the investigative side, how do you take these elements that I just described, which is really talking about the hardship of having yourself and or your family members removed from the United States back to your country of origin. How do you work that out where, obviously in this field you can never guarantee anything, but where you're upping the chances of the immigrants having this stay granted by ICE?
Well, I mean, let's start how I started in the beginning. Basically, say you and I, we work together. I get basically like an intro package. You already reviewed your client. You already have a summary of what his situation or her situation is. And I take that situation and I try to find objective evidence for them to stay in the country of the U.S. Now, what the objective evidence is, articles that confirm that them returning to the country would cause them dire harm and hardship. I think you and I discussed one not too long ago where there is somebody who needed to seek a hardship and try to stay because they had a daughter that had autism. However, the country they were going back to didn't treat that type of autism that she was suffering.
Yes.
So over here we have a broader spectrum of autism that most doctors will treat as compared to if she would have returned to her country. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was Brazil.
Yeah, some of you guys may know I am Brazilian. I moved to the United States when I was 10 years old. And as much as I love my country, certain aspects of our healthcare are not great. And that includes mental health, as well as other health issues such as autism. So to kind of piggyback off of what you're saying, in Brazil, the spectrum of the diagnosis for autism, it's gotten better over the years, but it is more stringent than in the United States. So in this particular situation, I do know what you're talking about. In this particular situation, unfortunately, the USC, United States citizen daughter, would have, if the mother was deported back to Brazil, she would have to follow the mother because there is no father or other family members in the picture that would be able to take her in the United States. So she would have to follow the mother. And in Brazil, due to the way that we have classified the spectrum, she would not be eligible for really any medical treatment. So with that being said, we kind of have the objective layout of the land. How do you get deeper into them? Because it's one thing, right? I can go to an ICE agent and say everything that I just said, and then the ICE agent is going to say, well, prove it. So that's what you're here for. Prove it. So walk us through the proving process.
Well, I'd start with the state attorneys with their articles, what they have on the subject matter. I'll go as far as the EU, any scholars articles. Being as this is a very specific type of scenario, I might not have as much luck. So then I would go to the next best thing or the best thing, depends on how you want to look at it, which would be nonprofit articles that speak about children who are in Brazil suffering from a certain type of autism and aren't being treated, or if they are being treated, it is the cost to have them treated is super high. That no ordinary person would be able to afford it.
So that's a good point, and I think we need to kind of be mindful of that. It's not only just the cost to the average citizen. In other words, you essentially have to be a gazillionaire in that country to actually receive the treatment, but also determining the locations, right? So in this example, Brazil's a very large country. They may be living in a rural area where even if it is reasonable financially for them to obtain the assistance, they may need to travel 6, 8, 10, 12 hours to get the treatment, which then at that point makes it financially and physically unlikely or a hardship, key word here guys, for us to actually be able to get the treatment that's necessary. With that being said, so when you're looking at these articles and you're looking at, the makeup of that particular country, are you looking at that country's own healthcare policies and their own internal laws?
Not only am I looking at theirs, I'm also looking at ours. I'm also looking at how nonprofits were able to assist. If they were able to assist, what would be the cost to actually have that happen? What was it? Was it no enormous cost, or is it something that they just charge high because there's not enough volume? I try to incorporate all of that, and then I include that into my subjective evidence. So I first get that, I look, and then I move into some of my subjective. I think I jumped a little bit.
So backtrack a little bit. So we've established that we're starting with objective. We're in the land of prove this. So we start with the objective, and now there's the second component of subjective. Can you explain to our audience, what does subjective mean? What are you trying to prove there?
Subjective is trying to prove that the client's own scenario support the hardships that are seen through the objective evidence in the state and the country. So, for example, we already have the initial inputs showing that our client's daughter has a certain type of autism, and for this scenario purposes, let's just say she suffered from Asperger's. I would get their scenario, how it started, what they did, who were their doctors, how is she being treated,
how long has the treatment
been, as much information as possible. Did they travel? Was there any out of pocket? Was there did you see improvements? How much improvements, significant improvements? What did the doctors say about the improvements? They reviewed their feedback, obviously, with their would be, which is probably going to be part of the subjective package. So
their medical records,
right?
And that's very key. I mean, we're using a medical hardship as our hypothetical, but this would be across the board, no matter what the hardship is. If the hardship is family separation, let's say a side hypothetical is, in this case, it's family separation. The mother gets deported back to her country. She's divorced from the father, who does have visitation rights, and the father is staying in the United States. Well, now the child is going to be fully separated from the mother. We would want a family law judgment decree specifying that the child is not allowed to permanently move outside of the country with one parent versus another. So in this scenario, we're really focusing on medical hardship, but really the message here is, no matter what the subjective hardship is, we want, and we need the client's consent for this, but we want the client to provide us medical records, court records, other things that are going to, again, prove to ICE. We're not making it up. We're not saying that this is going to happen and this is going to be a hardship. Just take our word for it. ICE is not going to take our word for it.
And it could be as simple as getting witnesses, or even trying to call the doctors in Brazil and get a statement from them that no, that's not covered.
That's a great point. So that is something that I actually want to go back to in terms of subjective evidence. And I feel like it gets, with ICE stays especially, I've had colleagues of mine say, well, it's super simple, just copy and paste. It's really not. And ICE stays is a full discretionary grant. There is no like black and white, you have to give me this. So because it's discretionary, meaning it's up to the officer that's reviewing your packet if they're going to grant it or not, evidence becomes super important. And I feel like people and some of my colleagues as well, they will minimize outside evidence of other countries, especially the country that the respondent is, or the immigrant is facing deportation to. Getting those doctor letters or even an expert in that country to back up what you're saying of like, yeah, you know, these objective articles say that there's no treatment, but I can also tell you right now in my practice, I can't offer it.
And that's key to somebody who needs to stay for their daughter, which you want to give our clients our best shot. So that's why we try to go to lengths to try to get all the support subjective evidence in order to prove the objective evidence that we have at hand.
Tie them both together.
Correct. Make sure they align, and the better they align, the better.
The more likely it is that ICE is going to grant your stay.
Correct.
So with that being said, if you, or when you get over all these hurdles and we package everything up and we have our strong subjective, our strong objective, we still typically need a statement from the client themselves, right? Correct. In their own word. What's that process? And what advice would you give to viewers when they're writing their statement, their affidavit to immigration? What advice would you give them of things that they should be thinking about and things that they should be focusing on? Because obviously on one end, you don't want to give them your whole entire lifehood story, because whoever's reading is going to lose interest in 5 seconds. But you also don't want to give a one-word or a one-sentence statement of, my daughter has autism, she's not going to get treatment in Brazil, give me what I want. Because that's not going to have...
Right, you have to have balance. So initially you want to give a start of where the problem first is. Obviously, in this scenario for the autism, say that, you know, when the child was born, so many months later, they were diagnosed with autism, and we knew we were going to have challenges, and that's when you started researching. Then present your challenges. Present what ended up happening, why you had to leave. Present that you were already thinking ahead that this might happen, and you did the research. Give them all the supports that you did everything possible to fix the scenario here, or find other opportunities and say, okay, well, say for if we keep it this example, but this applies to anything. You want to show that you gave your best effort, and you want to explain that you gave your best effort in every scenario. So this one say, look, I wouldn't mind going back to Brazil if my daughter wasn't going to suffer these hardships.
That's a great point. That's a very, very great point. And it's showing that you, the applicant, is and remains being proactive.
Correct. Being reactive, I mean, so people tend to be that way, but proactive shows effort, and that essentially that goes a long way
especially with a discretionary petition, because you want the reader to really understand the hardship and see that you're doing everything you can to make the situation better. Okay, so those are all great points. To kind of wrap it up, I do think that it's important that you guys understand, like I said earlier, these ICE stay of removals, they are discretionary. It is up to the officer that is adjudicating them or reading them if they're going to be granted or denied. Typically, the way that it works is you have the deportation officer that receives your request, they review it, and then they will refer their decision to the field office, the field office director, and the director will make the final decision. So the officer will review everything and say, you know what, I think this merits a grant, and they should have an ICE stay granted, and they should not be deported to their home country, and they refer with a summary to the director of why they think this is the case. And then the director reviews everything, and the director will essentially issue the formal grant. That grant is typically good for 1 year. That grant may entitle you to your work permit during the year that you are granted to stay, and may entitle you to your driver's license depending on what state you live in. So that becomes more of a state to state issue, and we can do a whole nother video on driver's license and obtaining it while in immigration proceedings. But for this video, the main thing is it is typically granted for 1 year. You are capable of getting your work permit during that 1 year, and you really should start thinking about your renewal about 6 months to 3 months prior to that 1 year being up, depending on your personal circumstance and objectively what is occurring in your country at the time that renewal is coming up. So thank you very much, Alex. We really appreciate having you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you, guys. And that's it for today's episode.